All right, time to start. Okay. The webinar has started, so we'll give just a few moments for people to join. Okay. Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I'm Angela Lazar, Digital Project Coordinator from NCEA, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A window. I will monitor the questions and we will get to them within the allotted time period. And you can access this Q&A box by hovering your mouse over the Zoom screen. And you'll see a little pop-up bar at the bottom of the screen, and it'll say Q&A box at the bottom right or bottom left, depending on your screen. And at the end of the session, I will share a link to an online survey on how to receive a certificate of completion for today's webinar. And that will be towards the end. So for today's webinar, Strategies for Restorative Family-Centered Catechesis, you will discover traits of successful faith transmission, explore research-based strategies for supporting families during asynchronous conversion, and learn effective practices for nurturing families navigating religious differences through restorative family-centered catechesis. Our speaker today is Catherine Bazin, a doctoral candidate at the University of Mary, and she specializes in formative capacity of education, focusing on nurturing healthy family functioning within family-centered catechesis programs. She also serves as the pastoral associate for evangelization at St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Catholic Church in Anchorage, Alaska, and she guides individuals in fostering family, growth, in light and love of Christ. So typically I would begin our presentation in prayer, but we'll allow Catherine to start the presentation in prayer. So you can go ahead and take it from here. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. So as she mentioned, I'm going to be talking about restorative family catechesis. I'm using the word restorative because we know that when families come to our schools and our parishes, a lot of times they're coming back from being away from the church for a while, or maybe they've experienced some difficulty in life. And as they grow in their relationship with Christ, there's so many opportunities to allow that to be a healing balm to their own personal relationships with Christ and each other. So really all of our work in catechesis is in some way restorative. But today we're going to be looking specifically at family-centered catechesis and expanding that lens. So in that spirit, I wanted to start us with the prayer, St. John Paul II's prayer for families. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father, you are love and life. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, born of a woman, and through the Holy Spirit, fountain of divine charity, grant that every family on earth may become for each successive generation a true shine of life and love. Grant that your grace may guide the thoughts and actions of husbands and wives for the good of their families and of all the families in the world. Grant that the young may find in the family solid support for their human dignity and for their growth in truth and love. Grant that love, strengthened by the grace of the sacrament of marriage, may prove mightier than all the weaknesses and trials through which our families sometimes pass. Through the intercession of the Holy Family of Nazareth, grant that the Church may fruitfully carry out her worldwide mission in the family and through the family, through Christ our Lord, who is the way, the truth, and the life forever. Amen. So before we move into the practical strategies in research that supports family-centered catechesis, I want to step back and just root ourselves in the overall aim of catechesis. So I have a sentence starter up on the screen. The definite aim of catechesis is, and I just invite you to finish that sentence in your own mind. What you see is the definite aim of catechesis, of the work we're doing in religious education with our children and families. And if you'd like, you can enter that in the chat or the Q&A box. I'll just give you a minute to reflect on that. Okay, so hopefully you had some time to finish that sentence in your mind. Some of you might have thought immediately to what our catechism tells us. Our catechism reminds us that the definite aim of catechesis is to put people not only in touch but in communion and intimacy with Jesus Christ. So it's important to remember that everything we do is centered around that relational aim. Now, that relationship with Christ has an intellectual, affective, and behavioral component to it. So as someone grows active in the faith in their life with Christ, it should impact all these areas of their life. In Catholic education, we know that it's important to care for all these elements of the child. Everything we do is imbued with this our own understanding of Christ and bringing others to that understanding of Christ. So before we talk about catechesis, it's really important just to hold that in our minds, and then how we are bringing families, whole families, into that deep relationship with Christ. St. John Paul II reminds us that the Christian family is the first community called to announce the gospel to the human person during that period of growth. He says the family is called to bring him or her through a progressive education and catechesis to full human Christian maturity. So sometimes this is gradual, it's an ongoing process, and that family home environment is the first place the children are receiving that gospel message or not receiving it. So it's really important that we turn our eyes and our lens towards what's happening in the home and act as partners with the families we're working with. Parents are considered the primary catechist of their children. The church holds this, and it's the principle of subsidiarity reminds us that there's a right ordering to institutions, that family acts as the primary institution, and as school and church, we should strengthen those relationships. Now, we know that the reality for some kiddos is their family structure looks a little bit different, and families may be going through trials that make it hard to live out that role. And so we're going to talk about strategies to help support all families in this endeavor. But it's important to remember that parents are that primary source for Catholic cultural identity and primary influence of a child's religiosity. That journey is very individualized, but it starts in the home. But parents need community. They rely on community for support, especially as they're walking through with their children through the trials of the world. I love this painting by Soshi Watanabe because it shows individuals coming together for communion, gathering together in community. You see their individual shapes, but you also see them bleeding into each other. And that's how we walk in our community spaces and our family spaces. We bring ourselves into that space, but we also bleed into each other. And so that's an important image just to keep in your mind as we move forward in talking through this care of families. Family-centered catechesis movements have been gaining momentum, especially in the 80s. They picked up steam. A family-centered lens is not the same thing as at-home catechesis. It's not outsourcing catechesis to the home. Rather, it's expanding our lens past the children in our care, and looking at how the whole family is being cared for, and oftentimes in those intergenerational relationships. One mental shift you can make when you're shifting towards a family-centered approach is pay attention to not just the numbers of students. I know as whether you're in the parish or the school, it's really easy to watch those enrollment numbers in terms of students, but how many families are you caring for, and what do those structures look like? So we talk a lot about student-centered learning. A family-centered approach just expands that to that whole family unit and what that looks like, and also recognizing that our families come in all different variations. In our own parish and school, we have aunts caring for children. We have single parents and different family structures that we want to be mindful of as we're seeking to support and bring them closer to Christ. In the Directory of Catechesis, the bishops remind us that family-centered approaches create opportunities for parents to catechize their children directly, for spouses to catechize each other, and for children to catechize one another and their parents. So as teachers, we get to experience those beautiful moments of inspiration, those aha moments, and the wonder of children. We want to make sure that we're facilitating those same dialogues in the home, and just creating intentional opportunities for the parents to witness that same wonder in their children. It also provides a space to honor a family's faith-infused cultural tradition. I'm based in Anchorage. We work with a very diverse community, and people bring in all sorts of cultural traditions that are woven into their faith. And one of the great things when we have community meetings where we're bringing parents together is it creates a space for people to reflect and think about how they're intentionally passing on their cultural traditions, and then also share that with others. Before we get into strategies of family catechesis, I want to reflect on some of the research, the recent research on characteristics of parents who successfully transmit the faith to their children. There's been a lot of studies out there lately about the nuns, the young adults that are falling away from the church, and we know there's a lot in the world that pulls children away from the church. That individual journey is very individualized. There's things outside the family and inside the person that will impact that faith life. When I work with families who have children or loved ones away from the church, I always remind them to be patient and that God can call people back. One of the great things about my work is I've gotten to hear so many wonderful stories about people coming back to the church and the way God has brought them back to the church. So there's always a place for hope. I also think it's really excited to look at those characteristics of families that really do a great job of rooting the faith in the child, and what the successes we're seeing and children that just continue to grow into that spiritual maturity. Bartkus and Smith carried out a study recently. They interviewed 245 families whose children had continued to grow in the faith into adulthood, and they just pulled out some key characteristics. And a lot of these weren't that surprising, but they're great to hold before us and remember. So first, they found that parents weren't necessarily deep theologians. It wasn't deep theological knowledge that they're passing forward, rather a very they understood a narrative understanding of their faith, their life, and how it connected to Christ, and were able to communicate that. They also acted as ongoing interpreters of their faith as it is seen and lived in the world. They were able to teach their children to understand what is good and evil and point to it in the world. They taught their children how to engage the world effectively, intellectually, and practically. But they also made sure the home environment was rich with religious reminders. Cameron,
Catherine,
yes.
we have a question. I don't know if you can view it, but I can read it out to you. It's no problem.
Sure. Could you read it out?
Absolutely. The question is, what are best practices for ministering to families who have mixed faith backgrounds or are blended? And in parentheses, divorced, separated, remarried, 2 moms, 2 dads, etc.
I am going to get to that. So hold on tight. We're going to move right into that. I want to root us first in kind of what the characteristics, what we're shooting for, and what we've seen as effective. And then we'll move into what works well with families that are in those asynchronous periods of conversion. Cameron Smith has done a lot of research on the connection of attachment and the development of religiosity. We know that secure attachment can help really foster spiritual maturity and increase that capacity for self-giving love. As you mentioned, we also know that families are often faced with trials. There's lots of things out of parents' control that can impact the individual and the child's life and move them into periods where they need extra strength and help. There's been a lot of great research on just how prayer can help reroute a person's sense of identity in God and build that resilience and increase a person's capacity for togetherness while under trial. So no matter where a person's been, just helping them grow in their prayer life and closer to Christ can help build that foundation back up. In my own research, I looked at what helped parents who were of different faiths, but wanted to, were both working to pass on, to nourish the faith in their children, keep a healthy dialogue going. And we're going to move to that next. I found one of the key things that surfaced in my research was the importance of maintaining that healthy ongoing dialogue, not giving in to withdrawal or avoidance of topics of faith, but also not being forceful and holding loved ones to unrealistic standards. So there's a balance that needs to be kept. So for strategies for building a family-centered catechesis program in your parish, in ours we implemented 4 practical strategies. We started a parent or community meeting. This is a place to invite caregivers in so that they're given that support. In our parish, 64% of our families are interfaith couples. So at our parent meetings, we know that sometimes we're having one spouse come and they may have a different partner or no partner at home. They may be getting pushback in the home. And so we wanted to make sure that that space was inviting for individuals in those circumstances as well. We also have interfaith couples who are of different practicing faith, and both couples come to our faith community and our parent meetings. We wanted to be intentional in how we were creating that space to be welcoming to interfaith couples as well. As we've been rolling out principles of the new evangelization in our parish, we've really worked to foster missionary discipleship in our leaders of the parish and the school. We use a program through Evangelical Catholic called Reach More to train individuals in this missionary discipleship to help them recognize ways to live out their faith in the world. And we use that program to train family guide mentors. We intentionally invite school families that are strong in the faith to go through a 10-week training program in the summer that trains in that missionary discipleship. And that is a key element, a strategy for our family-centered catechesis program. In the parish, we use a family-centered curriculum. There's many out there that are designed with a family-centered focus. And that's one of the strategies we use to shift to this approach. We've also continued our student classroom catechesis. Now, as I said, in our parish, 64% of our families are interfaith families. So as we were making this shift, we were very mindful of what those conversion influences may have on the family dynamics. It's not uncommon when one spouse is really growing in the faith and they're wanting to implement changes in the home based on their growing relationship with Christ. If the other spouse isn't in the same place, you might be introducing a source of tension. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting families through that process, through that growth. So it's important to keep in mind when you're looking at conversion in the family is that conversion process is always an individual process, but it follows certain patterns. And when I say conversion, I'm talking about the ongoing conversion that we are all called for, that turning of the heart towards Christ. So it's not just a single moment of conversion, but it's an ongoing conversion that we are all called to live constantly in our lives. There are different transformative phases that tend to happen as someone moves their life closer and closer into alignment with Christ's teachings. And they can vary based on individual histories and temperament. When someone has been wounded by especially members of the church or the faithful, their story might look different, and there might be wounds that a person needs to be aware of. I interviewed couples who had either at one time been of different faiths or were currently of different faiths, and were both actively pursuing faith formation for their children to see what helped them keep a healthy dialogue, maintain the health of their relationship as they intentionally worked to share the faith with their children. I also interviewed couples whose marriages had dissolved due to religious difference, and they were very open and honest about things they felt like hurt their relationship as they were growing closer to Christ. I found that it was important for them to intentionally foster healthy communication practices across all stages, especially in this period of differences. It was important that they nourish their own individual emotional health. I also noticed that parents who had navigated this transition well tended to adjust their strategies based on different prescribed teachings of the church. So there were some things that they held the line on very strongly, in other areas where they tried to be really sensitive to their loved one's perspective on, so that making sure they understood the distinction between when to hold that line and when to be flexible. They would also adjust their communication strategies based on the nature of the relationship, recognizing who in their life they had the authority over to be more assertive, and who they needed to give more freedom and just be that listening ear for. And then also differences in temperament and personality, and recognizing how that plays a role in how people respond to those efforts was really important. It's important to remember that each person's conversion journey tends to go through certain thresholds. Sherry Waddell, in her work on intentional discipleship, built off previous research that identified some key thresholds people tend to go through in this journey of conversion. So our goal with ourselves and our children and those working in the faith is to have this active faith where we're actively pursuing Christ, but it takes time to get there. And it's important to remember remember that sometimes when we have loved ones that are far away from the church, they need space to move through these different phases. There might be distrust there that needs to be built back up in that relationship. There might need time to engage that curiosity, that openness, and that seeking before you see that activeness, the active pursuit of the faith. The bishops refer to these stages as different stages of inquiry and maturation that can be characterized by that renewed openness of heart, capacity for dialogue, capacity for relationship of reciprocity, and that willingness to recognize the signs of goodness in others. So this is the space that we expect to see people move through if they are pushing the faith away or if they're moving away from the church. This research has been out there for a while. What has been researched less is how that looks like in the family as different family members are moving away from the church. So when I did my research, I wanted to really pull back and look at the family system as a whole. So remember that painting I showed earlier that showed the individuals blended together, where you had clear lines and then you had the overlapping lines. And that's such a great image of the family system as a whole. So when we're working with families, it's important to honor that distinct individual, to recognize that there's responsive structures within the individual that need to be given freedom to develop and unfold on their own, and that there's going to be things that each person just has to work through on their own, and we can help our parents recognize that in their own children. We also want to be mindful that there are ways we can influence the individuals in our lives based on environmental influences that we can help bring our children to and our loved ones to. And then there's these key relational sources of nourishment that we want to be mindful of. So in the environmental influences, first, the importance of leading by example becomes key, that they see that gospel spirit lived out in those that they love. That each person is able to describe the key moments of faith, and they're able to have time to reflect on that and actively live that out. Also, exposure to the life and liturgy of the church we know is very important. And then revisiting those sacramental promises can be key. Reminders of sacramental promises can really help people when they're struggling through periods of doubt or they've stepped away from the faith. Also, exposure to the beauty of creation is a great way to remind someone of the beauty of God and the power in their lives. Now, the relational sources of nourishment are areas that our program, our family-centered catechesis, really focuses on, because these are some great ways we can support families in their journey. So again, helping parents, especially those that are walking alone in the faith, really nourish their own lived practices of faith. Helping with that ongoing dialogue, and then affirming the strengths of different temperaments and personalities, and helping parents recognize that as a strength. This is one thing that really came clear in the couples I interviewed that felt like their religious differences really became a tremendous barrier. During that period, they weren't recognizing the strengths of the different temperaments as well. Also, couples that have navigated these periods of asynchronous conversion well and continue to keep that connection intentionally took time to explore other topics of interest and could use these as platforms to launch conversations of the faith. So there's ways that we can nourish that intentionally. There was also a noted need to show restraint in speech. Family system theorists give a really beautiful view of leadership in the family when there's tension over difference. And one of the theorists, Friedman, says that a leader in the family is able to articulate values and ideals while maintaining a non-anxious presence in the system. And this is one thing I certainly saw with my families that were maintaining this healthy relationship during these periods of difference, is that they really focused in on when they needed to restrain their speech, maintain that non-anxious presence, but again, asserting those values in a calm way. Also, we know humor and playfulness is a key element to nurturing both ways to lessen the impact of stress and anxiety on the family system and that nourish that family health. And then finally, holding each other accountable was a key source of relationship nourishment, especially for the interfaith families. I have interfaith families who the non-practicing spouse holds the other spouse accountable for their own ideals. And so these were the key targeted areas that we built a lot of our program around to help nourish in our community meetings. So as I mentioned, one of the key strategies is that parent and caregiver meeting. There's three main goals for that meeting. One, we want to foster community. So we want to have a space for family small group discussions where they're able to check in and talk about life, and they're able to authentically share their struggles. We also wanted to make sure that there was a space for people to be vulnerable, and that we're setting a tone that they don't have to feel like they're coming in perfect all the time. And so that training for the family guides that happens in the summer, that 10-week training, really helps set that tone and make sure our small group facilitators are setting that tone for their small group and table discussions. A second goal is catechesis, is to teach the faith, to remind parents of the faith, to make sure that they're aware of the same things that we're teaching the children in the classroom, that's in alignment with our curriculum, and that we're giving parents reflective exercises to think through how they're embedding that in their lives. We also spend time working on these key sources of relationship nourishment and cultivating those healthy family dynamics through their lived practices of discipleship. And so we have some intentional exercises that we use for that, and I'll go through some of those in a minute. This is a sample agenda of a typical parent caregiver meeting for us at our parish. We meet in the gym. We gather around large tables. We keep those family groups static. So we have one family guide or two family guides per family group, and 3 to 4 families in a family group. The families groups will stay the same over years, but we're always adding guides and adding family groups into the larger program. In a typical meeting, we start with an icebreaker. We move into the review of the objectives for the month. So each family is given a list of things that they're going to try to accomplish in that month. And sometimes it's a family discussion or activity. We then move into a short teach and a reflective exercise that's built either around scripture or art. And then that last 15 minutes or 20 minutes is guide time to really focus on nourishing the relationship or those practices of faith. Again, with those key sources of relational health, those have given a great platform for building exercises around that will help nourish these sources of health in the family. So sometimes I pull exercises that have been developed by others, and there's some that I've created on my own. I'll give an example. When we're looking at cultivating that listening and restraint speech, there's a really clear listening exercise that we have parents walk through with each other that just gives them a chance to refresh and practice those active listening skills. Sometimes it's as simple as a challenge, reminding parents to set an intentional goal to go seek out a related topic of interest together and then have a conversation of faith built around that. One of my favorite tools to use is a God Talk exercise. It's a resource provided by Bob McCartney that's great for the classroom and with parents, and it just sets these really clear questions that can aid that conversation of the faith. This is an example of the discipleship wheel exercise we use. This comes from our evangelical Catholic curriculum, but it just gives parents a clear image of those discipleship goals and areas to focus on. So we give parents time with each other and their guide to think through how they're growing in their prayer life, how they're incorporating scripture, how they're leaning into community or sharing their own faith with the world, and how they're staying connected to Christ through the sacraments, and then facilitate a discussion about that. I also have an example of an active listening exercise where we go through those key steps of active listening that we know are important in the classroom with students and teachers, but we're giving the parents a chance to exercise this with each other, with their loved one that's in the meeting, or a partner in the meeting if they're there as a single parent, or if their partner isn't at the meeting with them. That way they're just practicing these skills. When I group my families, I intentionally group like families together, people with similar characteristics. So I know that if I have a single mom, I have her with another single mom. So she's not the only single mom in that family group. It helps to really get to know families and have this on registration material so that you can kind of help families form these groups where they have a sense of belonging and connection with others in similar circumstances. So as we've unfolded this in our parish, I've also worked with others who are shifting to this framework. I've created a community meeting framework outline that kind of helps parishes who want to shift to this but aren't ready to incorporate everything all at once. A great first step is to build a community meeting for your school or parish. And there's some questions that can help build that meeting. So first, what are some of the needs and challenges of the families you serve? As you get to know your families as teachers, as principals, you have a sense of where your kiddos are at, where your parents are at. What are some needs you're hearing over and over again? What are some key demographics of your parish? What does that look like? Do you have a lot of single parent families? Do you have a lot of interfaith families? Are there extra supports you need to address those key demographics? Are there patterns you've noticed in the struggles that parents are bringing to you? Are there certain things you want to hone in on in this community meeting? And are there things that you need to adjust staff or catechist training to help address those needs? And then after that, I have some questions for creating that outline for that community meeting. First, starting with prayer, an icebreaker, what that icebreaker could look like, some key objectives and steps that you want parents to learn, understand, and do each month. Opening discussion questions to help facilitate and open up that dialogue. Key points, maybe coming from the faith formation curriculum or the religious ed curriculum. And then finally, an activity that parents can do with each other. And then one that can help them build those relationship sources of nourishment, and those healthy dialogue practices, and those lived practices of faith. So I have, as handouts for anyone that would like them, that community meeting framework. I also have more information on thresholds of conversion in the family setting, and more information on the family faith interaction model. I also have a trail log example that we use in our parish that has exercises aligned with each one of these relational needs. So those are available via chat. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Catherine, did you input the link into the chat?
I can do that. There it is.
Just so they have access to it.
Yes, I will do that.
The link I just input is the link to the survey where you can leave your feedback on today's webinar. So just to not get that confused with Catherine's link.
Is there a way I could email out the link? I'm having trouble with it. Oh, wait, here we go.
We can email out the link if you want to send it to me. I can email it to them, but it's up to you if you can get it in the chat. Or if you want to send it to me, I can put it in the chat.
There we go. That should work.
Okay. The link was input to hosts and panelists, so I'll just copy and paste it and everyone will be able to view it here. Thank you. You did get a question. I don't know if you can view it or not, or if you'd like me to read it.
Do you have any experience working with schools? Any thoughts on using family center model? Yes, so we're a parish school. We've been working very hard to integrate the two. So one of the ways we integrate the school into the family-centered program is we intentionally invite school families as family guides, and then we open up that parent meeting to school and parish families so that they can come together for that meeting. Now, our school kids aren't typically involved in our faith formation program because they're getting religious ed at school. Our parent meetings are once a month, so we invite school families, if they want to come to that parent meeting, they can use that week as a drop-in for class. So our catechists all know that on parent weekends. They may have extra kids in their class for that weekend. The expectation for the school kids is not that they're at faith formation every week because they're getting it at the school, but we still have parents invited and joining our family community meeting. And then we have a lot of our school parents as family guides. So they go through that intensive training in the summer. They're walking with both school and parish families during the school year.
You did receive a second question.
Yes. Yes. So for our parish family-centered catechesis program, we have we use a family-centered curriculum. The one we use is by Sophia Institute. It's Family and Faith for K through 8. Our middle school supplements with some other things. Sacramental prep courses are separate, but we have parent meetings for both. So the parent meeting, the big community meeting, is key to our program. So we invite all families into that meeting. Families are intentionally grouped with family guides for that meeting. For our sacramental program, we actually have an extra parent meeting. So if a parent has kids in both sacraments and just normal faith formation, they will have 2 meetings a month. Our parent meeting is once a month. I should probably mention that. That way it doesn't become too much of a burden on parents, but it does become a source of nourishment. This last month in Alaska, we had a tremendous amount of snow. We had a couple snow days off for school, which is really unusual for Alaska. We did not cancel our meeting because they only happen once a month. I was really worried we wouldn't have a lot of people, but we had a full house. And I think it's because parents really crave this time together, this time to enjoy that fellowship together. How do you help families of children that have distanced themselves from the Catholic faith? So we have a few different approaches we use, and one of the handouts I have in there is that thresholds of conversion for parents, and that has reflective questions that we can give parents that just help them recognize where their child is at, and then with intentional strategies for engaging them. It depends a lot on the age of the child. And a lot of other factors. So cultivating these one-on-one relationships and allowing space for these spiritual friendships is really important so that parents have a buddy that has kind of been where they're at. That drifting from the faith looks a lot different as an adolescent than as a young adult, and different strategies help in those different stages. There is a sense where a period of questioning is normal, but as parents, you have authority to require your child to keep coming to Mass or faith formation. So we try to make sure that we're encouraging the parent to continue to bring their child and then to have these conversations, and then use these healthy dialogue and communication strategies, just like you would for anything in the home. But I think first is helping parents recognize where their child is at, if there's an area of that relationship that needs extra nourishment before they're leaning into the teaching or the lecturing. Maybe there's a relational need that needs to be addressed first before we're leaning into that other area. But a lot of it will depend on the age of the child, where the child's been at. We also have had some families whose children have been, they just have other struggles that they're battling that have pushed them away from the faith. And so we've worked really hard to, one, make sure the parents are being fed and nourished as they walk through their children in these struggles. And then two, make sure that we have spaces where the children feel welcoming, especially our teens. I had a parent tell me once, my child has this conception that the church isn't welcoming to her. And the only way we can correct that perception is if she experiences a welcoming environment. And so we thought a lot as a pastoral staff and was working with this family of how we could create a welcoming environment for that child so that she could experience that love to help correct that impression. So a lot of it has to do with the things you're already doing culturally to make sure that you're living out that gospel message and creating that welcoming atmosphere for everyone that walks through your doors.
Great job answering the questions. If you have any more questions, everyone, please feel free to ask away. We still have so much time. Also, if you don't mind, Catherine, if we can put your email in the chat in case they have any questions afterwards, so they can reach out to you.
Sure. feel free to reach out to me with extra questions. I can email the resources if the link doesn't work.
It's sent to me, so let me copy and paste it. This is her email if you'd like to reach out to her. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to her. We're happy to help you in any way that we can. And Catherine, I just want to say thank you so much for such an excellent presentation. We really appreciate you coming on and teaching us so much about such an interesting and in-depth topic.
Thank you.
And to everyone who joined, thank you very much for attending NCEA's webinar today. NCEA continuously strives to improve the quality of our services based on our members' feedback. So the link that I input earlier today in the chat, if you could please click on that and just provide any of your thoughts on the webinar today. The survey should take no more than 5 minutes to complete. And if you're interested in receiving the certificate of attendance, please include your email and name at the end of the survey. The certificate will be sent via automated email, so you do need your email in order to send that over. And please check your spam if you do not see the email within a few minutes. It usually ends up there. So to learn more about any upcoming webinars, please visit ncea.org/webinar and have a great week. And thank you again so much, Catherine, for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.